the portion of Chayisora, Vayu Chayisora Meir Shana, V'esrim Shana V'sheva Shana B'shnei Chayisora. And the life of Sarah was 100 years, 20 years, and 7 years, which is a little unusual. The way the Torah, we know how careful Torah is not to use extra words. That's firstly. So the word Shana is repeated multiple times. Secondly, one doesn't speak this way. When you say a person lived, he lived 127 years. Not only because the Torah is so careful not to use an extra word, but that's not the way one speaks. So why does the Torah mention the word Shana 3 times? So Rashi mentions the Midrash in a moment. And then it concludes, Shnei Chayisora. These were the years of Sarah. It's evident. I mean, if she lived 127 years, these were the years of the life of Sarah. So what does it conclude? And these were the years of the life of Sarah. So Rashi cites the famous Medrash. When we speak about every grouping of years, it mentions the word Shana, lo maloch. To tell us that each one has to be understood in its own right. Bas kuf ke bas chof lechet. When Sarah Imenu was 100 years old, she was like a person who was 20 years old, lechet. There's certain things that until you're 20 years old, one is not held culpable in terms of certain levels of spiritual excision. So when she was 100, she was as pure as a person would be at 20, no level of liability. Ma bas chof lochoto shereina bas onshin. A person's 20 years old. The person is not subject to punishment. And the way it's explained, there's certain behavior patterns. A person once their bas mitzvah, the age of 12, and the child reached adulthood, the person has full liability if they violate the Torah. Okay. However, there's certain areas, I'll give you an example. There's certain things which are based on one's discretion. And a person doesn't have sufficient maturity to have that level of discretion, but if you do, there's serious liability to that person. Sarah Imenu, at the age of 100, those areas, she was perfect. As a person at the age of 20, there was no liability because factually she never crossed those lines. When she was 20, she was like a 7-year-old child for beauty. What does this mean? It's interesting, sometimes you have a beautiful child. A child's beauty develops until the age of 7. When you see a 7-year-old girl, she maxes out on beauty. When you see her, let's say, fast forward when she's 20 years old and adult, it's the same beauty except it's in an adult state. But the beauty hasn't increased. That's the way a child of 7's beauty as an adult looks. Her beauty continued to evolve and develop until she was 20 years old. So therefore it was a different dimension of beauty, Sarah Imenu. Therefore Sarah it's mentioned, the Gemara, was one of the most beautiful women who ever lived, Sarah Imenu. When she was 7, when she was 20, she was the equivalent of a girl up to 7, meaning she continuously developed, okay? So therefore, that's the Shana mentioned by each grouping of years, 100, 20, and 7. But what about the conclusion? And these were the years of Sarah, Shnei Chayisora, Kulan Shavin Latova. All the years, it concludes, were good years. Now, the question is, they were good years. Now, sometimes in life, you have certain experiences and you see them as negative. But looking back, those years, although there were certain moments of pain, in terms of what it brought you to, you see it, you put it in a positive context. I'll give you an example. I mean, it's difficult to understand. Sarah Imenu was taken by Paro, king of Egypt, and he was going to defile her. And if you look in the Midrash, the night that she was taken to Paro, she was crying. She didn't know what her fate would be. And Avram was worried, didn't know what was going to happen. And then it turned out, as it says, that she told the Malach to smite, and he smote Paro. Paro couldn't go near her. And he said the next day to Avram, why don't you tell me she's your wife? I would have gone near her. And then Avram leaves with tremendous wealth. Such wealth that the land could not carry the wealth. That's the wealth. And because of that wealth, Avram was able to do many things that he couldn't have done before. So although at the moment it was something not knowing where it would end, and it was beyond terrifying, but ultimately that moment brought them to another level of reality in terms of their ability to be able to be world players on the global level in terms of their level of influence. So looking back, even at the negative experience for the moment, but then understanding where it brings you, it's kul latova. They're all good. Every moment, all the pain. Ultimately, everything was positive. That's Rashi. Rashi's the Chazal, is the Midrash. But over here, there's a famous Orach Chaim HaKodesh. There's a question when Sarah lived until 127 years. She lived. Was she meant to live longer? And Hashem cut her years short? That's one position. It's unclear. No, she was not meant to live more than 120 years, 27 years. And her life ended with this painful moment, believing that her son was killed by her husband at the Accredited. She was not meant to live more than 127 years, but her life only ended as a result of believing her son was killed. Or no, she was meant to live many more years, but her life was cut short. So he's going according to the interpretation that she was meant to live many more years, but her life was cut short. Now, if she would have lived those years, which she didn't live, sorry, Menu, she would have been minimally at the level that she was at the time of her passing. In prophecy, Sarah was a greater prophetess than Avram. Of greater. We find Avram Megayeres HaNoshim, Sarah Megayeres HaNoshim. Avram converted the men, Sarah Menu converted the women. So she did great things. She was Avram's partner fully in espousal of monotheism. So now all the years, now that she's not going to be by his side, to assist him in his global outreach, to proclaim Hashem's name and impact the world with all this Kiddush Hashem, she's denied all that because she's not here. Shnei Chayesora. Hashem accredits her for all the years that she didn't live as if she would have lived. Although she only lived 127 years, Hashem accredits her account as if she lived those years. This is the meaning, Shnei Chayesora. Although she did not live those years, she's accredited with those years. That's the Orach Chaim HaKodesh. And that's the conclusion of the Pasuk, Shnei Chayesora. Although she did not live those years, the years that she did not live were still accredited to her. But factually speaking, it's an explicit midrash. It's explicit midrash. The Midrash Tanchuma says, not over here, that a person lives 80 years and he does phenomenal things over an 80-year lifetime. Another person lives 40 years and Hashem takes him after 40 years. So the person who lives 40 years says to Hashem, it's not fair. If I would have lived 80 years, I would have continued to do what I did up to 40 years, to do those special things, to do your will, to do the mitzvahs. So now that you took me at 40, I'm being denied that I'm not able to do what I would have done if I would have till 80. So why do you credit the person who lived till 80 and God knows everything? God knows if you would have lived those other years, those additional years, you would have accomplished all that. So you know what Hashem says? You're fully accredited, whatever the lifespan of a person is. That person, if he was that special person up to the age of 40, he receives no less credit than the person who lived till the age of 80. Because that's fair judgment, and that's the way Hashem accredits accounts. It's something unbelievable. God knowing the future, knowing exactly how you would perform, and you would have performed, Hashem will not deny you. Hashem has his reasons why he takes the person earlier. He has his reasons. But factually, if you would have lived longer, You were no less dedicated, you maybe even more dedicated, because as time goes on, you grow. I always say over from Reb Sadia Gaon, every day would do tshuva. We mentioned the other day, why did he do tshuva every day? Not because he did tshuva because he sinned. Because every day that passed, he realized the next day that the previous day he was not that level that it could have been the previous day. So he did tshuva for not being on the level that he should have been the previous day. Now we all believe, we're maxing out. We can't do better. The next day, all of a sudden, we advance. So now we realize that the day before we could have been here. And like I always say, you ask anybody, any one of us, are we doing our best? Every one of us say we could do better. No question we could do better. So if we could do better, why aren't we doing better? The answer is because we're satisfied at this level. For whatever reason, we're satisfied. We're okay with it. But factually, if you could do better, why aren't you doing better? The example I always give, a person works for a company and he invests for them and he's very capable and qualified. And he made a certain type of investment. And if he would have been a little more focused, he could have brought into the company another 50% return on that investment. But he didn't. It's a claim against him. Although you made us money, a tremendous amount of money, but based on your capacity, you could have done a lot better. So you denied the company that extra profit. It's the same thing. If Hashem gives you the ability, and he actually wills your existence and endows you with every aspect of your ability, if you know you could do better, why don't you do better? We all have to deal with that question. When that question will be asked, what's going to be our response? And maybe if we think about what our response will be, maybe we're going to try to always to do better and even better than we're doing. That's the understanding. So Shnei Chai Yisura means there's no question. Sori Meinu would continuously maxed out on whatever day, wherever she was. So she would have lived the additional years. Those years would have been special years, and therefore Hashem credits her for the years that she did not live.